Good morning, everyone. We will get started here in one moment. Let me get our slide up. Good morning to everyone who's popping on. I see our participant numbers still rising, so we'll give it a couple seconds before we get rolling. All right, we're about to after the top of the hour, so for the sake of time, we'll go ahead and get things started today. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning for our quarterly vision webinar. My name is Bailey Bostelman, and I'm the Regional Field Director at the Foundation Fighting Blindness. We're so excited that you're here with us today and that you've chosen to spend your Saturday with us. Before we get started, I would like to briefly review a few details for this call. Currently, all participant lines are muted and without video. Please be aware that the controls are at the bottom of the Zoom window. This control bar may collapse when it's not in use. If you would prefer to prevent the controls from auto hiding, you can use the following keyboard shortcuts to change to always show meeting control options. If you're using a Windows computer, you can press the Alt key. And if you are using a Mac keyboard, press Command and backslash at the same time. This presentation is being recorded and is available with closed captioning. To activate closed captioning, please select Show Captions at the bottom of the screen on the Zoom toolbar. Today's webinar is all about prioritizing mental wellness as an essential part of navigating life with low vision. During this hour, we'll explore strategies for emotional resilience and holistic well-being. This session offers a unique opportunity to gain professional insight and community support as we discuss the tools necessary to navigate the challenges of low vision while fostering a fulfilling and vibrant life. At the end of today's presentation, we will open up the floor for Q&A from our panelists. So whether you're a patient, a caregiver, or a healthcare professional, we hope this webinar will offer valuable insights. I'm welcome to hand it over to our first speaker today, Matthew Reeves, who is going to lead this conversation for us today. So Matthew is bringing a wealth of knowledge. He's a licensed therapist who specializes in support for the low vision community. He brings clinical expertise and a deeply personal perspective as he is personally impacted by Stargardt disease. His dual-in approach provides relatable and empowering roadmap for everyone looking to strengthen their mental health. Thanks so much, Matthew. Super excited to have you here today and hear a little bit more from you.
Great. Thanks so much, Bailey. I'm going to share my screen and try and do that. All right. Are you seeing that?
And no, not yet. Try it one more. Okay, here we go. It looks like it's coming up now.
Yep. All right. Hi, everyone. It's a real privilege to get a chance to talk on this topic to you. Thank you for being here. I'm going to let you know that I've got some slides. Everything on the slides I'm going to say out loud. You're not going to miss a thing. And I'll describe myself real quick. I'm a 51-year-old white man with short brown hair and an ever-graying brown short beard. I won't take too much time describing myself because I don't think that's why you're here, but I wanted to make that available if you care. On this slide is some contact information, and this will be at the end of the presentation as well, so you don't need to scramble, and I'm going to paste this contact information into the chat at the end as well. On the left side is a link to my podcast, which is called Insight Out. And that is a podcast that I started to help this community with a free resource. So it's an emotionally honest view or discussion about living well with vision loss and blindness. And there's a QR code on the screen, and the website for that is insightoutpod.com. And you can get it on any of the usual podcast locations. And if you're not into podcasts and you don't know how those work, if you go to that website, I would encourage you to just to fill out the form to drop your email address in there, and then you can just get notified with a link to listen to every episode. It makes it nice and easy. And then on the right-hand side of the screen is my practice, which is called Integral Mental Health Services. So if you want to reach out to me directly, you can. There's a contact page there. Also a QR code on the screen right now, and the website for that is integralmhs.com. And again, I'll paste that into the chat at the end so you can click on it if that's easier for you. I wanted to talk today about grief. I think in conversations about vision loss, the word grief gets used a lot. I think a lot of people recognize that it's a grieving process. What I don't hear is more in-depth discussion about grief and what's healthy and then when it can become unhealthy. So I wanted to talk about that in a little more detail than this community, I think, often hears, which is unfortunate. So in order to discuss how vision loss grief is different than the more common forms of grief, I wanted to just briefly describe how we usually grieve. And, when we hear that word out in the real world every day, most people are, when they talk about grief, they're talking about the grief after somebody dies. And we can use that as a very good example of the differences between what we would call simple grief and complicated grief. Simple grief due to death is pretty easy to understand. It can be really intense and really painful, of course, but it's fairly easy to understand and fairly simple. The person was alive and now they're gone. And vision loss grief is very different than that in a lot of different ways. And that's really what I wanted to discuss today. How do we usually grieve? Well, let me go back one slide. How do we usually grieve? When somebody dies, what do? We can watch and observe and see how humans have evolved to handle grief very well. It's all about connection. We first call everybody who knew the person who died, right? We reach out, we let people know. And then what do we do after that? Very shortly thereafter, we start gathering. We gather and if we can, we look at pictures together, we laugh together, we tell stories together, we share food together, we grieve together, and then we formalize that and we turn that into rituals, and we have funerals and sometimes graveside services, and we even extend that connection out into the community. We publish obituaries. All of that is so that we are connected and our grief is observed and validated and viewed. And here's the key word that I'm going to use a lot today, and that's accompaniment. I really like that word for what grief needs in order to process and move in a healthy way. It needs accompaniment. How vision loss is different, and forgive me if I'm going fast, we got a lot to cover in a short amount of time. So how vision loss grief is different. It's different in a lot of different ways, and it's very layered. So I kind of want to go through those one at a time. The first way that I've identified in my own life and working with people who are going through this on a regular basis is isolation. And the first type of isolation is pretty easy to understand. As we lose our vision, the world is in a very real way, getting smaller. That I think we can all relate to without too much discussion. I think it's pretty intuitive. But there's a second type of isolation, and that is that, when somebody dies, we've all lost the same person. Our relationship with that person is our own, it's unique, but we've all lost the same person. So everybody kind of has an easy time understanding it. But when we lose our vision, the people around us haven't lost that. And so we can start to feel very isolated because we feel very alone. The people around us are not understanding the nature of the loss. And so that's the first type, the first layer of where accompaniment becomes very difficult with vision loss. And that's the two types of isolation. Now, what do we do when people don't understand our loss? We try to communicate it. This is the second way in which getting that accompaniment that we need for our grief to be healthy and to process in a normal way. This is the second way in which that's really challenging. communicating vision loss is particularly difficult. English just isn't a very good language for putting into words what vision loss is like. And our society, our culture, doesn't have a very good understanding of vision loss. I think a lot of people who don't have any experience with it, I bet everybody on this call can relate to this with people thinking either you're blind or you're not. It's binary. And that's absolutely not the case. Even within a particular diagnosis like mine, Stargardt's or RP or Usher's or any of the other inherited retinal diseases, like it's different for each person. So communicating that, we have to find the words for it, and then the other person has to be open to receiving that communication. So that's the second layer that I want to talk about how it's hard to get that accompaniment we need. And then with a progressive vision loss, which I think most people connected with the foundation, probably therefore most people on this call, although probably not everybody, we are dealing with new normals. We are, just when we kind of go through the grieving process for one phase of our loss, maybe how it's impacted certain aspects of our lives, we may hit another advancement in our progressive disease, and that can take away some other aspect of our vision. So it kind of resets this grieving process back at, I won't say square one, but earlier. And now we need to go through that grieving process again. We need to communicate it again. We need to seek accompaniment again. And then when that happens, it happens again, which takes me to the next layer, which is an uncertainty. Conversations in our community with doctors never go like this. They never say, oh, this is your condition, and this is exactly what's going to happen, and exactly what you're going to lose, and exactly what it's going to look like, and exactly when it's going to happen. We don't get those kinds of conversations, like, ever. It's always about, well, this is how it usually goes, and this is what might happen, and it varies from person to person. So that can be like walking around with a piano hanging over your head, hoping the rope doesn't snap, and that can provoke a lot of anxiety. So that uncertain future is another way that it's hard for us to even grapple with our own grief. It's hard to accompany our own grief in that way. The next aspect of the next layer of how it is hard to seek that accompaniment from others is that they have not lost what we've lost. As compassionate as the people around us want to be, as engaged, as empathetic as they want to be, they haven't lost what we've lost. As much as they may try to understand it, and they may get a long way in that process, they've not lost what we've lost. And here's the kicker: they have lost something. If they're in relationship with us and we've lost our vision, they may be grieving their own process. They may be grieving, let's say they are our life partner. Maybe they are grieving their sense that they are connected with us, right? Maybe they're grieving what they anticipate will happen in the future. I know one couple where the person who had not lost their vision feared that they would never be able to go on a vacation again. That wasn't the case, but that was the fear. That was the grief. It could involve parenting. It could involve the desire to be there for somebody in their logistical needs, helping them out with things that they can no longer do, like driving. It's not that they're not willing. I'm not suggesting that they're not compassionate or even generous or even happy to do it, but it is a cost. And so they're going through their own grief while we're going through our own grief, and those two griefs are different. And so now it's not just a question of us communicating our grief to them. It's also a question of receiving their grief and helping them with accompanying their grief. And that gets to be a real dance in timing. And, one of the things I talk about sometimes with my clients is how there's a time offset, there's a delay between when the thing we lost and the grief we've been doing and having to work on because we accessed it directly, and then sharing it with the other person. They're seeking to understand our grief after we've been through that. We're not going through it at the same time like we do when somebody dies. So that makes it's that time offset can also kind of complicate that grief dance that we have between ourselves and the people who are trying to accompany us. So those are the layers that I have time to talk about. The next thing that I think is really important is to recognize when grief goes from a healthy human, normal, natural process to when it gets blocked. Humans have a few 100,000 years of evolution to get good at grieving. Grief is always in proportion to how much we love the thing that we've lost. So if it's a big loss, it's going to be a big grief. That's normal. Our emotions are there to serve us well. So grief is not a problem to be solved. It's an experience to go through, just like joy. It's just the other side of that coin. And the only time grief can actually become dangerous is when it's blocked up, and it gets blocked up when it doesn't get that accompaniment that we've been talking about. So we need to know what that looks like so we can recognize it and address it so that that danger zone doesn't move forward. And it's probably worth saying at this point that if you think that grief is moving into the realm of depression, getting help sooner rather than later is a really good idea. Depression tends to be a feedback loop, and that I don't have time to get into today, but it tends to feed on itself and tends to grow once it starts. So stopping it at an earlier point is a safer way to approach it. So I just want to encourage that. But what does depression, which is usually how grief turns into something that's dangerous, it's usually depression. It could be anxiety, but it's usually depression. So I'll focus on that. What are the signs of that? Well, the first may seem a little obvious, but I'm going to call it pervasive sadness. The word pervasive there is really important. You know, grief is, of course, going to involve sadness. But usually a healthy grief that's processing within a certain amount of time, we start to see some sunlight bursting through the clouds. Occasionally, we can find the capacity to laugh or smile or not dwell on that sadness. But when grief turns into depression, it can start to feel much more pervasive, where like we never get a break from it for weeks or months on end. That's a good signal that the grief has turned into something dangerous. The next one is a lack of motivation. Depression really robs us of our capacity to find the energy to do the things that are good for us. And that could be nutrition, that could be hygiene, that could be financial, getting the bills paid on time. It could be going to work. It could be in the kind of textbook example of some pretty extreme or severe depression would be just getting out of bed. And if that's the case, that's a signal that we're dealing with something that has the potential to be dangerous, and we need to get some help. And then the last one I want to be really careful about, and that's lack of enjoyment. The technical term for this is called anhedonia. This is in depression. This is where the person with depression struggles to enjoy things they used to enjoy. But I want to be really cautious as I describe this. People dealing with vision loss, there may be activities you used to enjoy that you don't enjoy anymore because of the vision loss. That's normal. I don't enjoy board games the way I used to because I can't see them and I find it annoying. So that's not a sign of depression. That's a normal response and a normal adjustment. But if you find yourself losing the enjoyment of things that have nothing to do with your vision, that's a pretty good sign that depression is something we need to look more closely at. Now, how can we address that? This is a big question, but I'm going to just blaze through three categories here. And I believe that the key to addressing the depression that comes from grief, or grief not being processed, is to address that grief. Let's address the underlying issue. And that would be through connection or accompaniment. And there are three sort of categories that I've broken these down into. The first one is sort of a digital or online category. And I put this first because it's usually the most accessible. There are podcasts, my own included, but there are plenty of others. There are lots of others. Also, YouTube there's lots of YouTube channels that deal with this topic. Not so much on the emotional side, but just so you can kind of be with or other people who are dealing with vision loss. That's a way of having connection. It's kind of one way for the most part. The comments are a little bit of a way to make that a two-directional communication, but for the most part, podcasts and YouTube and things like that are kind of one way. It's very accessible, which is why it's useful, but it is limited in what it can do because it's not a two-way connection for the most part. And then social media can feel a little more two-way. You know, Facebook, Reddit, that's more conversation online. But I also want to caution us against that. Social media is designed to look like something it's not. It may have started out as a social connection, but these days these platforms are not optimized. They're not designed for social connection. They're designed to make money. And so I would encourage you, if you need to use Facebook or Reddit, or you find it valuable to use Facebook or Reddit or some things like that, by all means do, to the extent that it's useful to you. But if you find that the platforms actually have a negative impact on your emotional health, I would encourage you to limit the exposure to those platforms, or take the connections you make on those platforms and take them off of the platform. Exchange phone numbers, have real human to human connection without the conglomerates platform kind of underlying it, because those platforms, we know from a lot of data, those platforms are just very fundamentally unhealthy for our emotional health. Um, the next category is the blind and low vision community itself. What I love about this category is this is a whole group of people that is much easier to communicate with about vision loss because they've been through it themselves. All that burden, that cognitive load of sharing and trying to seek accompaniment gets a lot easier when you're dealing and connecting with people who have been through it themselves. So the foundation provides a lot of these resources through chapters, through events like this. You're doing this right now, as am I. So that's really valuable. You know, the national conference is coming up next month. People who have been to that talk about what an incredible emotional release it is to walk into a room filled with hundreds of people, maybe for the first time in their life, who get it and understand. Is that's accompaniment at a really profound level. And then I'll just mention, these are just examples. There's lots of blind and low vision communities online. These are two I'm connected with. And that's the iSpy.org. They're a relatively new organization that's just getting their footing, but they're looking to expand. So you can check them out. And then I met Evan O'Neill as a guest on my podcast, and she has launched the Brightside community, which is brightsidecommunity.com, I believe is their URL. She hosts a couple connection events every month for people in our community. And that's just two examples, and there are many. So I would encourage you to connect with that. And then the third category is more personal. And I put therapy at the top of the list because that's the waters I swim in every day. If you find that depression is cycling or circling in your life, finding therapy that can help with that can be incredibly powerful. And I don't necessarily think you have to have a therapist that has their own vision loss journey. I think it can be helpful. It can speed things along, but it's not essential because there aren't many of us out there doing this. So if you find a therapist that can validate what you're going through, can understand it when you describe how hard it is, then that connection can be incredibly meaningful. I will say I've heard too many stories. I don't think this is the most common scenario, but it does come up, so I want to mention it. If you find that your therapist puts you in a position where you feel like you have to justify how hard this is, or justify your grief, or you feel like you have to defend it, that may not be the best fit. It's not your job to validate your own emotions in a therapy session. Your therapist should be there for you and meet you wherever you are. So if you find that your therapeutic relationship isn't working for you, that's okay. Find another one. Any good therapist should be very open to that. It happens all the time. So don't be afraid to seek other options. And then let's see, I'm having trouble seeing my own screen. Support groups, local blind and low vision organizations often host local support groups. If there's one in your area, check it out. It may serve you well. It may not be your cup of tea. You may find just one person in that room that you connect with. That's a win. That's huge. So I would encourage you to just be open to the idea of maybe attending a support group. And you may not, it may be hard to find someone that's focused just on blindness or low vision. So maybe even expand that to disability support groups and more broadly. That may be an option as well. And then the last one is maybe the most important. You know, once we go through all the energy it takes to connect with our friends and family, and we deal with that grief dance and their grief and the communicating what we've lost and all of that, that's an investment and the reward is enormous. So that these are the closest people in our lives. They're best positioned to really accompany our grief, and that has enormous benefits. So I just because it's difficult at the beginning, if it is difficult at the beginning, doesn't mean it's going to be difficult forever. So those relationships can really be profoundly rewarding once we go through that process. So that's what I wanted to cover today in brief, kind of rapid fire. Sorry about that. Here's, as promised, the slide again if you want to scan that QR code, and then I will, as soon as I stop sharing, I will post the URLs in the chat if clicking on it is more easy for you. But with that, I will stop sharing and turn it back over to Bailey.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Matthew. And those were some fantastic points and some really great reminders too, that this isn't just something that impacts the individual person with vision loss. This is a full family journey. So we're going to open it up for questions here at the end. So go ahead, feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A or using the chat function. And we will go ahead and, talk with Matthew and Mark here towards the end. But I want to make sure that we're saving some time for our next speaker. We have Mark Arneson, who has built his career and devoted to service in the nonprofit sector, with more than 2 decades supporting individuals and families through advocacy, education, and client-centered care. Currently, Mark serves as the social support specialist at Hadley, where they're focusing on helping adults with low vision adapt and thrive through emotional and practical support. Mark works closely enhancing services that empower people with low vision to thrive at home, at work, and within their communities. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining us today. We're super excited to hear more about what you're doing at Hadley.
Hi, Bailey. Yeah, thanks so much. And that intro sounded way too impressive, but thank you. No, I really enjoyed hearing Matthew speak. And Bailey, thank you for the invitation to be a part of this. I too agree with Matthew. I don't know that we're talking about this enough. And just opening up this conversation, I think is really helpful. And Matthew, just hearing some of the things that you're sharing, I think some of the stuff that we're doing is trying to respond to exactly what we're talking about here at Hadley. And we've got a few programs that I'd love to make sure that I share with everybody. And, we get about maybe 100, 120, 130 calls per day here at Hadley from folks who are trying to manage life with changing vision. And they're sharing with us about how hard this is. And oftentimes we're hearing that this emotional adjustment to vision loss, it's as difficult, if not sometimes even more difficult than some of the day-to-day challenges that they're facing. And Matthew, I love that you talked about, the importance of connection, because that's what we're hearing from folks is there a way you can help me get connected with others and figure out how to cope with some of these difficult emotions? And people are craving that connection with others who kind of get it. And I love that you use that term too, Matthew, the folks who just get it. And, we're an organization that's been around 106 years now. We're celebrating our 106th birthday here in 2026. And we've just recently really tried to start addressing these, trying to help with some of these emotional challenges that come with vision loss and changing vision. It was actually in 2024, January in 2024, where we really started to see if we could offer a way, kind of a support group, an official support group to solely dedicated to helping with these emotional challenges. Now, we've got a couple other programs that I want to make sure we share about as well, to help with those connections. And the support group, we're calling it Adjusting and Coping Together. And like I said, we kicked this off in 2024, but we really wanted to make sure that we got this right because we knew how important this was for folks. And so we started with the pilot program, and then we kind of did some in-depth interviews with folks through this pilot program to make sure that we were truly understanding how to really present this group. And we learned so much. It was so good to talk to folks about their experience in this pilot. And we made all kinds of changes and tweaks. And then we kicked off our first official group, I think it was like April or May of 2024. And the whole idea of this group was to offer really a safe space for folks who are going through something similar to begin exploring these tough emotions and then maybe start to learn ways to manage and cope with them. And so it's an 8-week support group. And so for folks that are interested in this, we would ask if they're willing to kind of commit to an 8-week group. It's done over Zoom, and there's lots of ways that we can help you kind of get connected over Zoom. So it's similar to this meeting, and it's an hour and a half each week. And each week we're going to meet and we're going to touch on a different topic related to vision loss. And so one of our topics is called Giving Up the Car Keys. And so it's this whole idea of how grief and loss is associated with vision loss. Another topic that we're offering is calling Feeling Like a Burden. That's another week that we're addressing how challenging it can be to, ask for help with things that you've done your whole life, or maybe something when you've been the one that's helping others your whole life as well. Does vision loss define me? Is another week that we're kind of talking about. Impact on relations. And then you talked about isolation, Matthew. That's another topic. That's another week that we're just talking about, is how difficult this can be. Isolation and loneliness that can sometimes be a part of vision loss as well. And so there's 8 weeks, and each week we're really just trying to allow a space for folks to kind of really start to explore these difficult emotions, along with maybe 15 to 20 other people, and together maybe realize how we might be able to start managing and coping with these. Now these groups we've kind of got to a point now where we've got a consistent schedule. We're kicking these off 4 times a year now, and we're running 4 groups at the same time. So 4 concurrent groups, 4 times a year. And we're roughly, so it's, if you do the math, I'm not the math guy, but if you do the math, I think it's roughly around 300 people per year that are kind of getting through these groups. And like I said, we kicked these off in 2024, but we kind of get a slow start, and we were having groups, sporadically. And so we've had about 400, I think, so far complete these groups. 400 of our members here at Hadley complete these groups. And now, again, we're into this pattern of maybe we're looking at maybe 300 a year. And so it's great for them, but we have a wait list now of about, last time I looked at it, I think it was about 150 people that are currently waiting to participate in these groups. And I think this week was week 7. So next week we're wrapping up another round of groups. And so we'll be kicking another one off in July. But we don't want people waiting for this kind of help. And we're adding more and more folks to our wait list every day. That's kind of what we're seeing, is people are really craving this kind of support. And we just hate to see people waiting for support like this. And so in an effort to really make it available to as many as possible, we tried to transition the content from these groups into a video series that's available on our website and through the mail. And the idea was to start addressing some of these same topics that we're covering in the group, but that's going to be available when you want it, and you're able to go back to it however many times you want it. And so we've got our Adjusting and Coping Together video series, and there's 7 episodes. One of the episodes is called Grief and Loss. There's one called Emotional Spirals, things that just kind of set you off and can set a tone for the whole day. One's Asking for Help. Isolation is another one. Impact on relationships. I think, Matthew, you talked about that as well. And I think Bailey even mentioned it's sometimes can affect, a wider circle than maybe just friends and families and yourself. And then the last one is Feeling Like a Burden. And then there's a self-esteem one as well. So does vision loss define me? And in what we tried to do is I know, Matthew, you're talking about that human connection and the one-on-one connection, which is challenging to do in a medium like video or something like that. And so we wanted to make it something as relatable as possible. And so we have one of our members sharing their story, and they start the episode talking about their story and how it relates to that particular topic, whether it's grief and loss, emotional spirals, isolation, and things like that. And then we transition into kind of exploring ways to maybe manage and cope with these difficult emotions. And we launched this series in January this year. It's actually January 27th. Grief and Loss was the first one that we introduced to our community. And it quickly became the dominant #1 content that we offer here at Hadley. It was quickly became, and then for 7 weeks, each week we offered another one of these topics. And so for 7 weeks, each week we introduced another one of these episodes. And each week that topic that we introduced then became the most dominant episode or series available on our website. So people were really looking for this information. And I'm telling you, we're asking for suggestions. We're asking, was it helpful? 98% of the folks that are participating in this content, are watching these videos, are telling us that it's helpful, which is really cool to hear. But the comments that we're getting, you have an opportunity to make a comment at the end of experiencing this video. And I was so surprised at the vulnerability, the openness that people were sharing about how tough this is, and how grateful they were for some of these strategies. I was talking with one of our members, Eric, and he was saying that after taking the grief and loss workshop, he said it was just so helpful to be reminded over and over that what I'm going through is normal. And that it was normal, and other people are experiencing this well. It was so helpful for him. Brenda was another one that said, what this helped me do was see that there's a way through this, which I thought was so powerful as well. And then, we weren't quite sure how the video series would land, if these episodes would be effective. We know that the one-on-one connection in these in-person support groups can be so much more impactful sometimes than sitting and watching a video. But one of our members, Wendy, she had commented on each one of our videos, and she had been really open and just really vulnerable about the impact that they had. And so I reached out to her and I said, hey, Wendy, it feels like these really kind of hit home for you. And she said, Mark, you don't understand, more than you would ever know. These hit home for me. And what she shared with me, I thought was so interesting. She said she's not super good at being open with others. She just doesn't feel comfortable sharing her emotions with others. She said she just keeps things bottled up. She said what these episodes allowed me to do was to watch these in the comfort and safety of her own home. She said actually in her own room, her own bedroom. And it allowed her to begin to explore how truly difficult this was. And she could just be honest with herself about some of the challenging emotions that she was feeling, she was having, and how they were impacting different areas of her life. And then she shared that she's already started using some of the suggestions on how to manage and cope with some of these feelings. And so she just said that she was grateful for the episodes. And so it almost, for her, this was a nice way to kind of start to begin to explore these emotions in a safely, not, because she's just not super comfortable being open with other people or being part of a group. And so our video series is available on our website. And I think we have Brendan here from Hadley that's sharing some information about how to access that from our website. We also have an app that you can download if you're using your mobile device or a tablet. It's a little bit better way to kind of interact with the content. And then we can send it in the mail too. So everything that we offer can be sent in the mail too. And there's ways that we can help you figure out how to do that, whether it's large print or audio and things like that. So our support group, we're getting more and more folks, through our groups and finding help, connecting with one another, but then connecting with our content as well. So that's one area that we've really tried to focus on, is more of an official support group where folks can really connect with one another and start to address in a safe space some of these difficult emotions. Now, we also realize that connecting one-on-one is a different experience than connecting within a group. And sometimes folks may be more comfortable with that, connecting one-on-one with folks. And I know, Matthew, you're talking about that human connection and how important it is. And I love that you use that phrase, someone who just gets it, because we hear ourselves saying that over and over again. We started this program, it's called Peer-to-Peer. And that the whole idea is to connect folks in a one-on-one relationship, with someone who just gets it. And so it's one of our members that we would introduce you to, and it's just done over the phone. And so it could be somebody that's located across the country, but it's somebody who is experiencing something similar to you and just gets it and just understands how tough this can be sometimes. And so the program, the way it works, we've identified a handful, maybe a dozen or so, what we call connection points that seem to really be helpful in kind of kicking off this relationship. And so we'd get to know you a little bit. We'd understand maybe your eye condition, your level of vision, your hobbies, your interests, things you like to do. And then we would introduce you to another one of our members who has some things in common. And then we suggest maybe, starting the relationship with, half an hour, 45-minute phone call once or twice a week, and then just see how it goes. And we've been doing this for about 3.5 years now. We've got about 1,200 people that are part of our peer-to-peer program. So there's roughly 650 relationships out there, and we're really starting to get some feedback about these relationships. We have folks that we connected 3.5 years ago that are still talking weekly, which is so cool to hear. In fact, about 75% of the folks that we've connected are still in a relationship with one another. And when we asked why it didn't work out, most of them was because of the time zone. I guess that West Coast to East Coast time zone is tricky to find the right time to talk to one another and call. So we're trying to figure that out a little bit better. But so it was more logistics of why they didn't stay connected. And the whole idea behind our peer-to-peer program was really to help combat those feelings of isolation, Matthew, that you talked about, those feelings of isolation and loneliness that can sometimes be a part of this experience, be a part of vision loss. And so we asked, is this helpful? And 98% said, yes, this relationship has been helpful. And we also asked, has vision loss ever contributed to feelings of loneliness? And it was like 85% said, yes, my vision loss has contributed to that. And then we asked, what has helped combat some of those feelings? And we gave them a list to choose from, whether it was social media, friends and family, church or religious groups, support groups. I think we had a list of about 10. Our peer-to-peer program is one of those. And when folks said what's helped combat them, it was most helpful in combating this, our peer-to-peer program came to the top of the list, which we did not anticipate. And to be honest, we were quite surprised that this seemed to be, for most folks, for the folks in our program, one of the most helpful things in combating feelings of isolation and loneliness, which, looking back on it, I guess makes sense. What's happening is they're becoming friends. And so that whole friends and family, I think, is tied into this peer relationship. And it's somebody who gets it and understands the challenges and the experience. And so, and somebody you can turn to, when you need to. And I'm telling you, I know I'm running out of time here a little bit, but the coincidence in these relationships that we're hearing, sometimes they don't make sense. There was one woman this Margaret that we introduced. We were introducing her to one of our other members, Donna. And Georgette is one of our staff here at Hadley. She called Margaret and said, hey, I've got this wonderful lady I want to introduce you to. And Margaret said, I'm sorry, I'm actually going into a funeral right now. A good friend of mine had passed away. Can I call you? And can I call you in another time? And Georgette's like, of course, yes, by all means. So a couple days later, Margaret reached out and said, sorry about that. I was busy that day. And Georgette's like, I just want to introduce you to a peer. Her name is Donna. And Margaret kind of got a little emotional. And she said, the funeral I was at was a dear close friend of mine, and her name was Donna. Of all things. And then a couple of weeks later, Margaret reached out and she said, I just have to share with you how important this relationship was. She's like, we talk daily now. She's like, thank you for giving me my Donna back. I mean, we hear these stories all the time, and this personal connection with folks, it seems to be so helpful and important for others. So anyway, our peer-to-peer program is something that we're doing to connect folks in a one-on-one relationship. And then the last thing I just want to mention, and I know that you threw it out there, Matthew, the idea of podcasts. I know it's not an ideal way to connect, and make those connections. We tried to figure out, is there a way that we can help make that, or to our best ability, have that human one-on-one connection, but do it through the means of a podcast or, something that you're listening to. And so we created this podcast called Insights and Sound Bites. And the whole idea of this podcast was to hear members, we call them members, the folks here at Hadley, just to hear their stories. And so they're super quick. They're maybe 3 to 5 minutes long, and it's just folks sharing their stories. They're talking about how hard this is, the challenges that they're facing with vision loss, but then how they've overcome them. Things that have been really difficult, and maybe there was someone or something that really helped them overcome that challenge. And the feedback that we're getting from folks listening to these podcasts is so cool. They're connecting to the story, they're relating to the folks that are sharing their story, and then they're finding hope, which is really cool. They're being inspired. Like if they could get through it, then maybe I can too. One of the women I talked to, I'm not remembering her name, but I thought it was great because she shared with me that she's listened to the same episode. I think it's like episode 37. She said she's listened to it like over 40 times. Every time she's feeling a little discouraged, a little down, she goes back and listens to this episode and it said it just lifts her spirits. And we're hearing that from so many other people, connecting to the story and then finding hope, but through the ways that they've overcome their challenges. So that's another way that we've tried to help with some of these emotional challenges with the podcast Insights and Soundbites, which you can find on our website or anywhere you listen to podcasts too. But this is kind of our first start. We're offering the support group. We've got this one-on-one connection to our peer-to-peer group. And then through our episodes on Insights and Soundbites, you can really hear people's personal stories as well. And into the future, we're looking to connect family and friends over a similar kind of support group as well. We've got some ideas for other help that we're working on too. But just want to share some of that stuff. So I think I'll leave it back to Bailey now.
Perfect. Yes. Thanks so much, Mark. And I think those are such valuable resources that you just mentioned, and such great tools that people can utilize. I think my favorite part of it was the story you shared of the woman who didn't feel comfortable yet, probably talking about her mental health, but there was still something out there so she could begin to explore that journey of identifying what that grief is. Like Matthew said in his speech, is that, identifying what the cause is first is the best place to move forward. So we're going to have to go ahead and go through some of these questions in the chat. As a reminder, if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop it in the chat, and we'll get through as many of these as we possibly can. So I'm going to try to lump some of these together and with some themes that we have going on here. So there was a couple questions around, are there support groups for young people, so young adults, and what really is the age demographic for Hadley? And I know Brennan just put something in the chat about it's ages 18 and up. But Mark, could you maybe share, are there ways for, say that it's a young individual wanting to connect with other young individuals, that you can match them up that way?
Are we talking younger than 18? Bailey, is that what the question was?
In the chat, They didn't specify. They just said support groups for young adults. So I'm guessing it'd be over 18.
Yeah. So, what we've recognized when we did our pilot program with our support groups, we recognized there are certain criteria that's really helpful in forming these groups. And age was one of those criteria. Folks of relatively similar age seem to connect a little bit more easily with one another. And so that's one of the things that we're taking into consideration when we're forming the groups. And most of the folks that are coming to us are older adults new to vision loss. And so, but the groups are available, as Brendan said, anyone 18 and up. And so, so we just want to make sure that we're kind of connecting them in relatively similar age groups. But there are, I think that there are some different opportunities. And we can recommend some different programs that we've kind of become aware of for folks that are below the age of 18 to maybe connect with others. So if they give us a call, one of the things we'd be happy to do is explore how we can find resources for them. We've got quite a bit of a resource list, and a lot of times what we're doing on the phone is working together with folks to find what's going to be most helpful for them. But we would want to connect them if they're kind of going to participate in one of our groups. We would connect them with relatively similar age folks as well.
Perfect. Thank you. And Matthew, I'm going to throw this one your direction. So there's a couple individuals in here in the chat who have mentioned that they've tried therapy, they've tried anxiety medication, depression medication, they've worked through a lot of these steps, but they're still having these challenges. What would be your advice for them?
I'm going to answer that in two parts. And first of all, I'm sorry to hear that. That's That's really tough when you go through the effort to try and get some help and the help doesn't help, or doesn't help enough.
Right.
That's incredibly frustrating and even more isolating. So I hear you. Without trying to, therapize on a website or a webinar, that would be a bad idea. So I'm going to keep this general. Um, First, on the medication front, I did see that question also. And kind of there's a symmetry to both of these answers, both the medication and the therapy that you may have tried. Both require the right fit. And if it's not working, it can be really frustrating. But the encouragement I would give you is that both have the potential to be very helpful. But neither one is going to work without the right fit. Finding the right medication can be incredibly valuable, and it's a great foundation for helping to make the therapy more effective. If the medication can help you regulate and be present and connected with yourself and with your therapist, then and take the tools you learn in therapy outside of therapy and use those tools throughout the week or throughout however long it is between sessions. That's really useful. Finding a doctor who's good at this is profoundly difficult right now. There are a lot of primary care physicians that are happy to write prescriptions for antidepressants and other mental health medications. Some of them are great. Some of them, it's not their wheelhouse. It's not what they spend all day, every day doing. So finding an expert, an actual psychiatrist, may be the next step. And to explain and be really transparent about what you've tried and what has not worked and why it hasn't worked, what the side effects have been, maybe. But I got to acknowledge, I got to talk about how profoundly difficult it is to get a good psychiatrist right now. There are not enough of them. And so psychiatry referrals are a real problem right now. And I don't have a solution for that, unfortunately. So I would just say self-advocacy and being tenacious and even stubborn about getting a good appointment with a good provider. And then the similar thing applies to your therapist. And I kind of touched on this before. The research shows that about 80% of the value in therapy actually comes from the relationship with the therapist. So it doesn't mean the person's a bad therapist if it's not the right fit. And so any good therapist should be very open to, if it's not the right fit for you, they should help you find the right fit. This is about working themselves out of a job and finding a good connection. I would just say, as tough as it is when you're already in that place, to take on even more burden of getting more help and is hard. I know it's a hard thing to hear. It's a hard thing for me to say, but finding the right help is probably the best advice I have. And then, barring the medication and the therapy, all the other resources that Mark just talked about, all the other resources that were on that I talked about, there are things outside of those two options that can be really effective and maybe a stopgap measure. But I hear your question, and I empathize with how it's tough to spend years asking for help, and then it's not giving you what you need. I'm sorry to hear that.
Thanks so much, Matthew. And a few questions that we've had in the chat, and this might be a little bit of a two-for question, maybe Matthew and Mark, you might have some insight for this one. But we've had some questions around jobs and what that world of maybe you have to make a career change because of your vision loss. You have to give up something that you're skilled at and look differently at the job world. So what type of resources or advice could you give individuals who that's one of their main areas of grief?
Mark, do you want to go first this time?
I think we were both being polite there, weren't we? Bailey, we hear folks calling all the time with that question. And so, again, over the phone, we can explore resources for folks to see what we can identify in their local area. We do know it's a challenge. And so, in addition to the kind of the emotional support that we're offering here at Hadley as well, we do have all kinds of other resources. We're really helping folks kind of discover how to do things that have become much more challenging after vision loss, and working is one of those areas. And so we do have specific, we call them workshops, but they're kind of like informational guides, little tutorials, offering suggestions on adaptations that can be made in the workplace, or how to talk to your employer about your vision loss. So one of our topic areas focuses specifically on helping folks kind of navigate, working after vision loss as well. And so we do have some options for folks in that area. But in addition, if those aren't going to be helpful, we'll spend some time, whatever time we need to identify local resources with them over the phone too.
This is an enormous topic. So I'm sitting here thinking, which part of it do I try to address? In addition to being a licensed therapist, I'm also a certified rehabilitation counselor, and that involves a lot of training in this area. I spend most of my time on the mental health side, but there are other CRCs that do more the career side. But there's navigating the vocational rehabilitation system, which is a beast. And there's that. There's understanding your legal rights with the ADA. We can talk about that. There's websites to figure out, and it's easy to, sometimes we say, well, just ask for the accommodations you need. You have a legal right to them, as if that's simple. There's a website called Ask Jan that is designed to try and help you figure out what accommodation to ask for, because that's not always a simple question. And there's the frustrations of when the ADA doesn't apply. And there's also the topics around, this is a biggie, but disclosure, just how we're talking about how to talk to an employer maybe, but that's a subset of disclosure in general, how to talk to other people about what you're going through. And that's a giant topic into itself. I guess I can't give specific answers because every individual is unique. But what I will say is your urgent need might be financial. It might be, I just got to pay the bills. And that may be the survival need. What I would encourage you to do is never fully lose sight of the fact that you deserve a job and a career that is fulfilling. And that's an option. Like we do not have to give up on that. So we may have to get through the survival mode to get to the thriving place. I don't want to sound like an embroidered pillow, but it's true. It's true. We can have jobs as visually impaired people that are truly thriving and gratifying. And that is the ultimate goal.
That's great. That's great. A couple of people have mentioned in the chat that how do we find a therapist that's local to me? And is there any therapists that specialize in low vision, similar to you, Matthew, where you really work with people in this community? I will one place I will direct everyone, and I'll throw it in the chat as well, is the Foundation Fighting Blindness, our mental health resource center. We have a partnership with Alma where you can connect to licensed therapists in your area who actually have gone through a training so that they can better serve individuals in the low vision community. So if you're looking for those resources, and specifically somebody who works with low vision patients, I'll drop that in there just so you have it. But Matthew, maybe you could talk a little bit more on that of, what maybe someone should look for in a therapist as they're looking to have these conversations around low vision and that grief.
Sure. It is tricky. To the best of my knowledge, there is no website that lists everybody who does this work. Maybe that's a project. maybe that'll go on my task list. But the first sort of I think you're going to have probably a difficult time simply Googling it. I hope my website comes to the top if you find that and you're in my area, but I do also work nationally with some constraints. But I find that web results, again, it serves the advertising. It doesn't serve you. So I have limited success just Googling it, or even going to Psychiatry Today, or the other directory sites. They're just not really set up for this. So the first kind of out of the box idea that came to my mind is get in touch with other people who are already in this space and say, hey, have you found a therapist that was helpful for you? And again, I don't think it may be helpful, but I don't think it's essential for them to have their own experience with disability or vision loss. If they do, may be helpful, but I wouldn't rule a therapist out because they haven't gone through that. A few episodes of my podcast are with other therapists, so you could dig into the episodes there. And if I'm not the right fit or if I'm full, maybe there's some others you can get their contact information through resources like that. You might be in a different country. So I would encourage you to be flexible and creative in how you find those resources, whether it's podcasts or networks or other types of connections. There's absolutely nothing stopping you from asking a person that you come across who's been in a similar place as you are now, hey, what helped? What are your resources? Can I get on board with that? So I would not be shy about that. If you need help, ask for help. That's a sign of strength.
I love that you started with, and we actually use your website all the time, Bailey, the foundation's website. Yeah, and that connection that you guys have with Alma has been really helpful for us to recommend for folks.
Good. And I think that I feel like the big consensus here on either end is that starting somewhere.
Yes.
And it doesn't have to be perfect, whether you're listening to a podcast or you're trying to, actually go to your first therapy session or you're just talking with peers. It's taking that step forward and starting to help and grow and harness in on and improve your mental health is really key from all of this.
And maybe I can just add to that, Bailey, quickly. Oh,
I'm sorry. I'll just say real fast. Often the first step is the hardest. So if you can muster that strength to do that before you get the help will help with the rest.
Yeah, no, the courage it takes sometimes to, and I think you said this too, Matthew, to even reach out and ask for that help. And that's why, I think what we've decided to do here at Hadley is, our Center for Support, the folks that are answering the phone, we've staffed this with social workers and counselors and people with social service background, because what we're hearing is a lot of the folks that are calling, we may be the first person they've ever talked to about their vision loss, or they're having a really difficult time expressing how they're feeling about this. And we just wanted somebody who could respond with empathy and compassion and lend a listening ear. And so we've decided to staff our team with folks that have those kind of skill sets, which seems to be really helpful. And I forgot to mention this, and I don't want to forget, everything's free we do at Hadley too. So there's no cost for anything, which I just want to make sure everybody's aware of too.
That's great. I know we're all looking for, easy access. So taking away that barrier of cost is definitely a fantastic thing to note, Mark. So there's, I know we're a little over the top of the hour here, and there's still a few questions in the chat. So if you have a very specific question, feel free to reach out to us at info@fightingblindness.org, and we can connect offline or get you connected with Matthew or Mark so that you can have those individual conversations if they're a little bit more specific. And first I just want to thank you all for coming out today. This has just been such a great wealth of knowledge. I also want to just invite you all to join us on June 10th through the 13th in Fort Worth, Texas. As Matthew was mentioning, this is our biannual conference, our United Envisions conference, and we would love for you to be able to join us there. We will have some sessions about living and thriving at that conference, so you can likely be able to learn more about some of these resources. I also want to thank our partners for our Mental Health Resource Center that we were talking a little bit about today. We're so grateful to have Astellas and Genentech, a member of the Roche Group, for their support through educational grants, and Boehringer Ingelheim and Johnson & Johnson, who are a program sponsor that help us make these type of activities happen. But last and of course not least, I want to thank our two fantastic speakers today, Matthew and Mark. You all were fantastic, and I think that what you shared with everyone today really made a true impact. So thank you all so much. Have a great holiday Memorial weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Bailey. Great
to meet you, everyone. Thank you, Bailey. Thank you, Mark.
All right. Bye-bye.